I'm an 87-year-old Irishman, travel the world. I'd like to present a more balanced view on this present Israeli-Palestinian Gaza conflict. To give a balanced view on Israel is impossible, as Israel is a complicated country, so complicated that even the Israelis themselves couldn't answer many questions. The singular problem in Israel is to create a Jewish state or a democratic state. They cannot have both. Ben-Gurion fudged this issue for 30 years, with Labour dominating Israeli politics and wars and other incidents preventing the aspect of a Jewish state being discussed. Now with a new right-wing government, with religious fanatics and Zionist nationalists, the problem is more difficult than ever. I see Israel as a quasi-democratic state. I see Israel representing the Western America and democracy as against Palestinians, Hamas, the citizens of Gaza, and Iran, representing the Muslim world and their dangers. A simplistic, perhaps, argument, but I see Palestine as, at best, dedicated dreamers seeking a dreamland, homeland that has never really existed. They are very much like our die-hard nationalists who refused to accept the 26 plus two counties presented by Michael Collins, caused a civil war, as a 32-county Ireland was never on the cards. A greater Palestine is equally as remote. Evian. No refugees in 1938, no help ever from even Australia for refugees, and boat was turned back to Germany. Israel learned then that it could never expect help from anyone and had to depend upon itself. Of course, Zionism has aspects that are obnoxious. Of course, ultra-Orthodox Jews are a problem. Of course, new settlers have a serious view. Israel is the more complex democracy, quasi-democracy on planet Earth. However, Gaza was given freedom, qualified, of course, in 2005. Freedom. How the liberal Jews managed to convince the government to withdraw troops and knock down citizens. They expected a Singapore, a new state city perhaps, with tourism, with education, with infrastructure, with jobs created. What happened? The citizens of Gaza, these people now under fire and getting killed, voted for Hamas, a terrorist organisation, to be their government. They thereby declared war in Israel, and a mini-war existed between 2005 and October 6, 2024. Hamas was contained, the Jews felt, and they were wrong. On October the 7th, Hamas invaded Israel and created havoc. At a concert, they took refugees and killed people. And thereafter, what did they expect? Did they expect Israel to kiss them? No, Israel then invaded with two objectives. That was the elimination of Hamas and the rescue of the hostages. Now, the hostage situation is Hamas' key card. Obviously, after a month of the conflict, Israel must have known that the hostage situation was serious. The hostage situation was probably that they would be dead anyway. So then they had only one objective, the elimination of Hamas. Interestingly, this is now June. A few weeks ago, on Israeli television, there was a propaganda movie, but with some facts, of how the four hostages were rescued. It showed that the hostages were three in one family home and one in the other. The Israeli government, the Secret Service, explained that the terrorist attacks were continuing all the time from the places in Gaza that they had conquered, because the Hamas simply were mixing with civilians. So they had to disguise themselves as Arabs and prepare to attack these two houses to rescue the hostages. They did this with a small number of men by creating diversions elsewhere and withdrawing the Hamas troops from the area. They rescued it for three hostages, and the three hostages then got out. And of course, there was holy war there with the Hamas attacking the Israeli forces, and war occurred again. The tunnels in Hamas are unbelievable. We think of a tunnel as something small. These were engineering miracles, obviously costing millions. And trucks and cars can drive down these tunnels. Continuing. There has never been a Palestinian state. I repeat, there has never been a Palestinian state. At Versailles, numerous states were created in 1920, states with weird borders like Czechoslovakia in Europe, and Lebanon, Syria, in the Middle East. But no Palestine. Why? Between 1920 and 1940, the British Protectorate controlled this area, and certainly between 1920 and 1930, there were Arab uprisings against the English, and the Jewish numbers were so small they were inconsequential. Between 1930 and 1940, the Jewish numbers increased, and Jewish pogroms were less, and there were territorial battles between Jews and Arabs. And this worsened during the war years when British tactics changed, and they encouraged the Arabs and discouraged the Jews. So to say that Israel was favoured by English is totally wrong in the war years. They may have been initially, but between 1940 and 1945, the English favoured the Arabs because they wanted the Arabs' help in the World War. Between 1946 and 47, the Irgun, the Stern Gang, and the Haganah were undoubtedly terrorist groups, and undoubtedly they committed atrocities, perhaps more atrocities than the Arabs. But a mini war was going on between Jews and Arabs, and England was happy to get out. Finally, in 1948, a settlement occurred. The United Nations declared a state of Israel, a tiny enclave about the size of Munster. And at the same time, the two-state solution was offered with a state for Palestine as well. The Palestine area was smaller, but agriculturally better, and Israel had been given a lot of desert. This was rejected by the Palestinians, rejected by the Arabs, and rejected by the Palestinians because they thought a pan-Arab army would sweep Israel off the map. For a month this looked like it happened. Of course the United Nations appealed to the International Court. Of course the United Nations sent humanitarian aid. Of course the United Nations sent troops to help their fledgling state that they created. They did not. They did nothing. Israel remained a pariah as far as the world was concerned, and they could go to hell. And they went to hell. Hell and high heaven, starvation, diets and so forth. But they managed to survive for a month. Then they got money from America, money that bought arms and ammunition and troops. And by 1952 they had stabilised and an economy and peace was declared. And Israel was still a country struggling. They had austerity diets, they had very little food, and they just managed to survive. In the meantime, between 1952 and 1967, Egypt controlled Gaza. The West Bank was controlled by Transjordan. Not a whimper of a word about a Palestinian state those 15 years, as far as I know. Then came the Six-Day War. Wars in Israel are part and parcel of their lives. They are on a continual war footing, surrounded by Arab states determined to eliminate them. And they know they lose one war, they lose them all. If you lose a war, you don't get concessions. Palestinians backed losers in 4 wars, and they don't get any concessions. To even attempt to call Israel a state that will give back land that will mean they'll be attacked again is futile. In Israel, there are 4 at present components that are different and very, very important. There's the fanatical religious groups who don't work, who don't serve in the army, and who now are in a right-wing government, the most extreme in Israeli history. There's the fanatical Zionists who don't give an inch. And then there are the settlers who are not interested in giving up land. So the problems Israel has internally are very great. But the problems externally were looking very well on October the 6th, when a peace was envisaged with Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia don't like the Palestinians. Egypt doesn't like the Palestinians, and Jordan, with a million Palestinian citizens, don't want any more. In fact, no one wants the Palestinians except the Irish. We perhaps might invite them over 100,000 here and put them in Ireland's eye, or maybe perhaps find Shangri-La for them. The Palestinians are certainly victims of their own stupidity and greed, not accepting the state in 1948. And the demand for a Palestine state now is absolutely lunatic. The future is not great. What is the future? The future is very much like that Israel will raze Gaza to the ground, the hostages will be killed either by the Israelis bombing or by the Palestinians, and a status quo is the best that can be decided. And of course, Hamas will be defeated, but another Hamas will arise. And Israel will be continually on the defensive and a war footing. The future is not bright, but certainly support for Israel is preferable to support for Iran, who sponsor these. And remember that on the northern frontier of Israel are Hezbollah, sponsored by Iran, and there's the Tutsi fighters as well in the further up the coast. So Israel is continually on a war footing. Do not expect Israel to behave in war better than anybody else. As regards the bombing and these views of these terrible, tragic decisions of Gaza, let me remind the world that in war there's only one object for the country, and that's to win. They don't think about humanitarian issues. They think of nothing except winning. And the proof of this is in 4 instances I can give you. Guernica with Franco, bombed to the ground. London with Hitler, bombed to the ground. Dresden, Germany, bombed to the ground by Bomber Harris. Hiroshima in Japan, bombed to the ground with an atom bomb. Were these countries any worse or any better than Israel? Is Israel expected to have a standard of humanity towards the rivals and killers than anybody else? Remember that in Israel at present, the war is against Hamas, but Hamas are involved with citizens, the citizens of Gaza who voted for them, and they mix intermittently. Dressed together, walking together. Fighting a guerrilla warfare is difficult for the Israeli army. Of course there will be civilian casualties. That's war. I'm sorry. I've no sympathy for the Palestinians. I've very little sympathy. And certainly Ireland recognised the Palestinian state and Palestinian ambassadors, and listening to the Palestinians' claims about refugee status of 3rd and 4th generation. Refugees are only the 1st generation in most countries, but in Israel and Palestine it seems to be 4 generations going back. And now there'll be more problems. Oh, I could go on, but I won't. That's about all I've got to say. Palestinians, there is no such thing as a Palestinian state. There was a Palestinian enclave, and I suppose from Jordan to the sea would include everything in that British protectorate. From Jordan to the sea exists. Perhaps they could swim in the Jordan and paddle in the sea, but they'll never have Jordan to the sea unless they eliminate the state of Israel. And that's a possibility in the future. Do you want that to happen? I don't.